Welcome to our two keynote speakers for our symposium on climate change. How many of us had a chance to attend some of the panels this morning? Yeah, what'd you think? Great. Yeah, I was very impressed. I'd like to obviously welcome you, but also want to thank the many people who have been involved in putting together this symposium at the request of the governor. And in particular, I want to acknowledge Scott Morgan once again for assembling these remarkable speakers, a diverse range of topics covering much ground. And so Scott, thank you for your work. Thank you for all who helped you. Let's give him a round of applause. If you would, as I introduce our first of the two keynotes, please silence your cell phones. Mobile devices and whatever you have. Mine is silenced, thank goodness, so I won't be caught. Take a moment to squeeze in if there are those who need seats as they arrive perhaps a few minutes late. Our first speaker is a greener. Rhys Roth graduated from Evergreen in a prehistoric period. Not true. But he attributes his education here some 20 years ago as probably one of the most inspirational learning opportunities he's had. And it certainly has directed him in very important ways affecting the subjects that we'll be covering today. He co-founded what is certainly the Northwest's leading organization dedicated to addressing problems of climate change, climate solutions, in 1998. And we have the very good fortune of having him here on the campus of Evergreen directing the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. He has been identified and received numerous awards for his work on sustainability and certainly is one of the most articulate spokespersons in the area, the Northwest, and perhaps our country on the issues we're discussing here. So he is covering a critical issue, infrastructure investment, how we pursue courses of action to get off carbon dependence. And with that, please welcome back to Evergreen our graduate, Rhys Roth. Rhys?
All right, I want to be able to roam around, so thank you for helping me with the mic there. Scott warned me that I wouldn't be able to see any of you, but I can kind of make you out. The lights are just piercing bright in my eyes. This is the first time I've met President Bridges. Welcome aboard, and I'm super excited for your leadership here. It's going to be a great era. If anything, you understated how much Evergreen meant to me. When I went here, you did understate. It was 25 years ago that I graduated. How many greeners are there now? Wow, great. Well, I hope the experience for you is half as valuable as it was for me. If it was half as valuable, it's going to be incredibly valuable. It made a huge difference in my life and was incredibly rich. I do want to apologize or warn you at the outset that I'm an incurable optimist. I know that climate change is a horrific problem, that there are hundreds of millions of people around the world who are threatened. Their well-being is threatened by climate change. Thousands of species face annihilation from the earth. It's bad, but I can't help it. I'm just super excited about the revolution that's coming in energy and in our other infrastructure systems. It's an amazing time to be alive. So I think we have both incredible peril and incredibly exciting opportunities. And I think a lot of the greener grads, I look forward to you graduating and moving out into the world and helping to usher in and accelerate the transition to sustainable infrastructure that can get us off of carbon. So I've called this infrastructure investment a multi-billion-dollar opportunity to get off of carbon. We're going to be spending billions and billions of dollars year in and year out on infrastructure systems going forward. And so that's every time we invest in those systems, it's an opportunity to move us off of carbon. Full disclosure, infrastructure may be the most boring word in the English language, designed to make your eyelids heavy. And people are pretty oblivious to it. Not you guys. You guys are super knowledgeable and tuned in, but most people, they flip the light switch, they plug in their smartphone to get charged up, they flush the toilet, turn on the tap, take the waste out to the curb, jump in the car, and they don't give it a second thought. It just all magically works wonderfully. We have an incredible infrastructure in this country, but it's vitally important. So even though most people are oblivious to it, it's incredibly important. It's important for the economic well-being of our society, for the environment, for quality of life, just in terms of economic development. These are vital services. You cannot have functioning businesses, and basically our society and economy can't really function without working infrastructure. It's got to be affordable. It's got to be affordable for residents and for businesses. Infrastructure is a major job creator and sustainer. Brookings did a study in 2014 that found that over 1 in 10 jobs in the national economy, 1 in 10 jobs is an infrastructure job. So it's a major pillar of our economy. And you need good quality, functioning infrastructure to attract real estate development, to attract business investment into our communities. So you could bullet out all the reasons that it's critical for quality of life and critical for environment. We'll get a little bit into that going forward. But suffice to say, infrastructure is a lot more important than most of us realize. And we're going to be spending, as I mentioned, billions and billions of dollars on these systems just to keep them in working order, just to keep our society functioning. Globally, McKinsey & Company says $57 trillion we'll spend in what? By 2030, just to keep up with GDP growth, not even counting what we'd need to spend to make it climate resilient or to move us off of fossil fuels, just to keep up with GDP growth. Along the Pacific coast, CH2M Hill says $1 trillion, California to BC, between now and, 30 years from now. That is a lot of money. So the question really boils down to, how do we get smart about how we invest that money? How do we get the best possible outcomes for affordable, sustainable, resilient infrastructure year in, year out? We've run up quite an infrastructure deficit in the 50s, 60s, 70s. We had a lot of investment in building up this incredible infrastructure that we have, but the state and federal funding sources for infrastructure have shrunk. We don't necessarily have the revenue streams set up to be able to properly afford operations and maintenance. A lot of emphasis is put on that initial capital investment to build infrastructure, but we don't necessarily think about the life cycle, how we're going to effectively maintain that infrastructure. And when we defer that, it gets a lot more expensive to fix, 2 to 4 times more expensive if maintenance is deferred. And I think the civil engineering world and a lot of the decisions about infrastructure over the decades have been driven by civil engineers. But I think there's a growing recognition that things got to change. We can't sort of try to just use the same playbook that we have in the past. Peter Binney won the President's Medal from the American Society of Civil Engineers. So this is the civil engineers, main organization, and he won it because he helped lead the development of sort of it's called the Envision rating system. It's the equivalent of the Green Building LEEDs rating system for green building. You've probably heard of that. And they developed one for sustainable infrastructure. So he's telling his colleagues, we're making decisions today that we'll live with for 50 years. These are infrastructure decisions are multi-decadal decisions. So when we make a decision about how we're going to spend $100 million or $1 billion on a given infrastructure project today, people 20 years from now and 30 years from now will be living with that and paying for it. So we can't just continue to make decisions like we had in the past. That's his main point. Now, the purpose of the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure is to support innovation and support a new infrastructure paradigm and practice. And we're regionally chauvinistic. We think Oregon and Washington can become national leaders in sustainable infrastructure innovation. I'm sure John Byrne will maybe, have another region that he thinks is going to lead the world, but I think we can, and that's what we want to see. So my first order of business in starting the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure about 2 years ago was to go out, because I wasn't an infrastructure guy. I went out and sat down and traveled around Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, sat down with 70 thought leaders and innovators across the infrastructure silos. So energy systems, transportation systems, all the water-related systems, waste management systems, and really asked them, what's the future of infrastructure? How do we get to sustainable infrastructure? What does that look like? What are the barriers? How are we going to overcome those barriers? And we wrapped all of that, sort of synthesized and distilled that into the inaugural report, Infrastructure Crisis Sustainable Solutions, to provide guidance and inspiration to decision makers and policy makers and professionals in the field going forward. So I'm going to highlight some of the principles, the innovation principles that emerged from all those conversations with thought leaders and innovators. First off, go for the Triple Crown. It's not just about building cheap infrastructure. The best infrastructure solutions, the best investments in infrastructure are going to deliver affordability, not just in terms of upfront cost, but in terms of the whole life cycle of the asset. So really looking at the 30-year life cycle of any given investment. Superior environmental performance and resilience in the face of hazards, risks, disruptive events. All three of those things, the best solutions do all three of those things well. The fourth, if there was a quadruple crown, I think the fourth crown would be delivering multiple public health, environmental system, economic, social equity benefits across the community. So it's not just about a particular silo, it's about delivering, everybody in the community is paying for these systems, so delivering benefits community-wide makes a lot of sense. I don't expect you to try to make sense of all those arrows, but just quickly, along the left are the sustainability performance metrics that we identified in the initial report. So sustainable and superior environmental performance by an infrastructure system or project will maximize the efficiency with which we use resources, maximize the use of local renewable resources. It'll be clean, little or no greenhouse gas emissions, little or no release of toxic pollutions, and in some cases actually enhance natural systems. Along the right, this is, I keynoted a conference called Biocycle, and it's a slice of one of the sectors of infrastructure. So it's the waste management sector of infrastructure. And this slice, there was 500 professionals in this audience, and they're focused on just the organic waste streams. So all the poop, all the food waste, all the tree trimmings, everything organic that flows through our economy and that we kind of discard as waste. They're really looking at how to maximize and optimize the recycling and beneficial use of all that great material. So I just grabbed off their website the kind of things they're focused on and started to connect them to those sustainability metrics. And you can see, I think the point of this is that good infrastructure solutions do more than one thing. They have multiple benefits and they serve multiple goals. And that leads to a second principle for sustainable infrastructure innovation. Bridge silos. Now this is easier said than done, but we manage and budget for and pay for infrastructure a lot of times in silos. So transportation is separate from stormwater, is separate from wastewater, and energy, and then you'll have electricity and gas, separate organizations, separate mandates. And so it's really hard. Some of the best solutions are going to be when you start to look at that as a whole system and figure out ways that you can find elegant solutions that deliver benefits across the system. But it's really hard when you're managing those systems as separate silos. So bridging silos is a key challenge. Here's an example. I love this. So one of the big problems in urban areas, like 30%, the most valuable real estate in urban areas, about 30% of urban areas will be roads. But those are also corridors for infrastructure. And you can see, emergency power, fiber, reclaimed water, district energy, sanitary sewer, potable water, natural gas, telephone, electricity. You can have all kinds of infrastructure running under the streets. And because they're managed by separate agencies and utilities and companies, a lot of times someone will come in and dig up the street to deal with something one year, and the next year someone else will come in and dig up the street and deal with their piece of the infrastructure. If you could coordinate and bridge the silos so that these efforts could be coordinated and aligned and only dig up the street once, you could avoid a lot of very expensive economic disruption and gain a lot of efficiency. So affordability, you're going to save a lot of money and get better outcomes. Okay, another principle, build a better business case. So a smart investor, before they put in serious money, is going to really kind of vet the alternative pathways that they can invest that money. And the same should be true with infrastructure. We're talking about $1 million, $100 million, $1 billion investments. Before committing that money, a lot of times and I love civil engineers, they're awesome. They're awesome people. But we don't want to necessarily have them driving the decision making by themselves. So a lot of times the civil engineer will come and say, hey, system's aging over here, or we've had a lot of growth. We need this. We have this problem. Here's the solution. And then the traditional approach would be, okay, let's work that through the budget process. But the new investment discipline would say that absolutely could be the best response to that problem. Let's put that in the hopper. Now let's invite in innovative ideas that break out of the box, that look at different ways to solve that same problem. And then let's take our 3 or 4 favorites and let's thoroughly compare them on a life cycle basis to see which ones generate the most community value and the most value not only to our utility, our silo, but also to local government as a whole and to the community as a whole, and measure the full life cycle, benefits, costs, risks. Seattle Public Utilities is brilliant at this. They are the gold standard in my mind. They have, and most communities can't afford this, but they have 5 full-time economists that do this life cycle, triple bottom line evaluation on every investment they make. They save millions and millions and millions of dollars every year through this process because they're giving decision makers so much richer palette of information and options for how they invest their infrastructure dollars. The world is changing. Infrastructure, because these systems are so long-lived, infrastructure decision makers really have to be sort of futurists, future casters. So they have to look out 20 years and say, is this kind of system going to make sense and be useful to people 20 years from now who will still be paying for the decisions that we're making today? So we have some wild technological revolutions and breakthroughs that we've seen in the last 10 years and that we will see in the next 10 years. So anticipating what those are going to be and how that is going to change our systems. We have climate change coming down the pipe and other environmental stresses that we need to factor in. And we have changing living patterns, just the lifestyles that people choose and develop and prefer change over time. This graph at the bottom here is, you can't really see the details, but along the bottom you have 1997 to 2017. And this shows the projections by the federal agency that's charged with aggregating up and projecting how many miles all of us Americans will drive in a given year, all together, all the miles that we drive, and projecting that in the future. And that's really important because that's forms the basis of how we're going to make investment decisions in highway capacity, for example. And that federal agency, the colored lines that go straight up across the graph, they made these projections every couple years. And so you can see their projections just show every year we're going to drive a little bit more and more and more and more, just in a steady rate. And they keep coming up with the same projection. We're going to drive more and more and more every year. The black line is the actual. So you can see around 2004, we sort of has started flatlining. And yet they continue to project increasing mileage every year. So, part of that, it could be that young people just don't have the same relationship with the car as I did in high school when I had to have a 67 Mustang to be anyone and to attract who I needed to attract. And I think, the social media, the device, there's just a lot more things that they care a lot, and they base their identity on a lot more now than I did when I was in high school. So that could be one factor kind of flatlining there. Anyway, that's an example of needing to take into account how lifestyles are going to change. Technological revolution, solar PV, it's just astounding, the changes that we're seeing. This is from Deutsche Bank. And they say solar's now supplying 1% of global electricity. That doesn't sound like much, but that is a staggering amount compared to, 5 years ago, if a serious analyst would say that 1/3 of the global electricity supply, which would be, we'll be using twice as much, 1/3 of that will come from solar by 2050. That would have been the most absurd, ridiculous kind of idea, maybe even 5 years ago. But solar's enjoying just explosive growth. And you can see that between now and 2017, this was from just before 2014, they're driving as the economy of scale, as companies gain more experience, more production on a larger scale, they're driving down every aspect, every slice of the cost. And so we're going to see another 40% cost reduction between 2014 and 2017. This is pretty revolutionary development. Can you go back one? Just quickly, up here, 400 kilowatt hour solar array at Gresham, Oregon's wastewater treatment plant. Really cool plant there. They've managed in the course of 3 or 4 years to go from spending, I believe, $50,000 a month on energy to completely supplying all their own energy through energy efficiency, through the solar system, and from capturing the biogas and turning that into energy at their plant. So they're essentially energy independent. And they'll pay that off in 8 years, and then they'll be saving $50,000 a month every year after that. Anybody recognize this guy? Maxwell Smart? All right, we're definitely dating ourselves. Yeah. He was the cutting edge of technology, but so he had, we're carrying, most of us are carrying around this incredible information, communication capacity in our pockets. He was the early adopter. It was in a shoe, and so that didn't turn out to be the scalable approach. But he was with a super secret spy agency, so this wasn't available to the rest of us. I think most of our infrastructure systems really haven't been completely transformed by information, communication, monitoring capabilities, but there can be radical cost efficiencies and gains from these technologies over the next decade or so. This is really important principle. Building community prosperity, as I mentioned, over 10%, 1 in 10 jobs in the country is an infrastructure job. And so we need to integrate our infrastructure at the community level, our infrastructure plans with our economic development plans. Those should be tightly integrated. This is an opportunity to sort of insource and build pathways out of poverty and to help lift up parts of the community that are too often left out. Developing the pipeline, the training pipelines with our universities and our community colleges and partnering between the community colleges, training programs, and the apprenticeship programs, creating that pipeline. We have some of the best union apprenticeship programs in the country here in Washington State. And so there's a tremendous opportunity to develop the next generation infrastructure workforce. Across every one of the infrastructure silos, there is a huge retirement wave coming. I go to speak at some of these infrastructure conferences. There was one I went to, the Washington Association of Sewer and Water Districts, which I hadn't even heard of before, but there's 140 little water districts around the wastewater districts around Washington State. And I asked, how many of you guys are looking forward to retiring, say in the next 10 years? And about half of them raised their hand. So about half of them will be checking out in the next 5-7 years. And I actually thought it was going to be higher. So one guy in the front then yells, ask how many of us are already retired. So I had that, and about, most of the rest of the people raised their hand. There are a lot of folks on volunteer board of directors for the different wastewater districts. But yes, this is an increasingly urgent problem. So there is an urgent need to inspire and attract the next generation workforce at all levels to our infrastructure agencies. And there's a growing appetite in Washington State. The Center for Sustainable Infrastructure has been convening a monthly meeting of a number of the key associations in Washington State, looking to develop a new state infrastructure vision and strategy for Washington, with an eye toward 2017 legislative session. Certainly it'll take, to completely transform our infrastructure strategy, will take longer than that, but that's where we have our eyes. And this idea of the best solutions being both affordable and sustainable, and helping us be more resilient and fostering healthy, prosperous communities, that's right in the core DNA of this group's vision. Here are some of the organizations involved: the Association of Washington Cities, the counties, sewer and water districts, the PUD Association, the Public Works Board of Washington, number of state agencies. It's really an exciting, interesting coalition. It's very, very challenging to really try to rethink the whole state's whole approach to infrastructure finance and development. But this group's really engaged. Okay, so one other piece of that inaugural report is that we put out there as a conversation starter: 5 big goals for 2040, on the premise that these are really long-lived investments. If we're going to get smart and optimize those investments, it probably helps to have a vision of how those systems are going to work 25 years out. And so we put out these ideas as conversation starters in the inaugural report. Now we're diving in on the 5 big goals for 2040 research program. And we're about a month away from releasing the first in the 5 Big Goals series, and that focuses on energy, which brings us back to what we're here today to talk about: climate. And the core question of this report that will be coming out in a month is, how can the Pacific Northwest develop an integrated energy system, so it's not just about electricity, but also about transportation energy and heating and cooling energy, which I'll come back to in a minute. How can we develop an integrated energy system in Oregon and Washington in particular that is among the most sustainable, resilient, and affordable in the world? That's the question that we pursued with this project. I went down, I sat down with 33 individually, formally interviewed 33 top thought leaders and innovators in the energy sector, supplemented that with a lot of literature research, and then subjected a draft to a thorough review by 20 people, executive review team, which is fantastic. So this has been an amazing process that we're wrapping up now. And it really jumps out that we're entering a new era. There's radically declining costs and improving performance for new technologies: solar PV, electric vehicles, a variety of other technologies. There are integrated solutions emerging that span electricity, transportation, heating and cooling, span those silos. And then you have this spreading wildfire of commitment from citizens, from businesses, from institutions, from policymakers to shrink our carbon footprint. And that's becoming more attractive and easier to do as all these costs come down. So more and more people are able to make bigger commitments. So those things are really revolutionizing the prospects for our energy system in the future. And if it's true, if we can, in fact, have an energy system that performs better for roughly the same or lower cost over the life cycle, and give our kids clean air and deal with this climate challenge, if we can do all that at the same time, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we do that? And I think most people on any side of the political spectrum or any part of our rural, urban, conservative, liberal, whatever, I think everybody would be on board with that. If the system can perform better and cost about the same or less, and then give us a bunch of incredibly important environmental and public health benefit, yeah. Sorry about this. This is like directly from the table of contents of the report, section 3. But I wanted to highlight, there's a number of technologies that are transforming the energy system. I just want to highlight in red, energy tools in customers' hands. This is pretty revolutionary. Historically, the electric grid has been really managed by the priestly professional class of the grid managers, utilities, and it's been unidirectional, one way. So it's centralized, large centralized power plants sending power out to millions of passive consumers who receive that power and use it. Energy tools in customers' hands means that now suddenly customers who were passive are gaining the ability to produce power with solar PV, primarily, to reduce the amount of power that they need to do any given job, and to actually manage power. And one of the big challenges for this unidirectional grid, you have to balance supply and demand constantly, moment to moment. But demand varies on a daily basis, seasonally, so they sort of keep in reserve a lot of power plants, power generating capacity to serve the peaks. So peak demand, it's the most expensive power to supply because you just have these plants sitting there waiting for demand to peak. The fact that now there are two-way communication, sensor monitoring capacity, intelligent capability that can be built into appliances and electrical equipment of all kinds means that you can suddenly communicate with the grid and actually modulate down seamlessly, unnoticeably, the amount of power that's going to be used by the system when the grid is kind of running short. So you can imagine a system that doesn't need all those standby generating plants where you can actually just work with 1,000 different devices across the system automatically, very quickly. And you can actually get, as a customer, you can actually get paid. It'll be totally voluntary, but if you'd like to save some money and make your freezer available to the grid when it needs to shut off the freezer for one little cycle, won't even affect how cold your food is. You can do that, and you can save some money. Anyway, this flexibility revolution is pretty radical. The other thing is that with solar and wind coming on in bigger and bigger chunks, not only is demand variable, supply is variable because the sun isn't always shining, the wind isn't always blowing, so that's variable. So energy storage technology, demand flexibility, these can enable grid managers to integrate renewable energy into the grid cost effectively and to sort of manage peak demand cost effectively. Some of the other cool, the integrated silo bridging solutions, driving clean, we're moving toward a potential revolution in how automobiles are powered. All of us may need fewer automobiles as we move toward sort of car-on-demand services, maybe even that are driverless, that just come to the curb, pick you up, take you where you need to go, drop you off, and maybe you don't even need to own a car. But those cars are likely to be electric and kind of like computers on wheels. Clean heat, some tremendous changes going on in how we supply heating and cooling. Get back to that in a minute. Wastewater, these other utilities actually have a big role to play in the future energy system. Wastewater treatment plant. That seems like a really boring field, right? It's going to be incredibly exciting to go into wastewater treatment. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is. It's going to be really, really amazing. So here you have kind of the city, and then you've got your energy and nutrient recovery node and your water and thermal energy recovery node. So Over in this node, you have anaerobic digesters, combined heat and power. You're producing electricity. You're digesting all that sewage to produce biogas that you can turn into electricity. You have nutrients like potassium and other kinds of phosphorus, like valuable nutrients and minerals that you can recover and extract out of there that you can sell for a higher premium price. And you have a lot of organic, composted organic matter that becomes rich soil. Down here, you've got the wastewater treatment. Wastewater treatment plants have sewage treatment plants have pipes running all through our communities. Those pipes, we can be tapping heat and cooling capacity all along those pipes for local buildings, district energy systems. Our wastewater treatment plants could team up with what are now natural gas utilities, which could just be heating and cooling utilities, to develop district energy systems in every one of our communities. Tapping the sewage, just running. I mean, you take a shower, that hot water, you took all that energy to heat up that water, that's just going to go down the pipe into the way, we can tap that for basically renewable energy very cheaply. So, future of wastewater treatment plants, factories for clean water, producing clean water that can be sent around to the community, used for landscape, agriculture, groundwater recharge, clean energy, electricity, and heating and cooling, and rich soil that we're depleting our soil in a lot of places. So cycling all that rich organic matter back to the land can be really good. How am I doing for time? Okay, I think I can wrap this up pretty quick. Okay, so this big energy challenge to get to a world-class, sustainable, resilient, affordable energy system, a lot of our expertise, we have world-class expertise in the Northwest, very sophisticated energy planning, but it's very much focused on electricity. But this is not just about electricity, and it's not just about transportation. Those two are huge, but it's also about heating. And heating's sort of the invisible, it's nearly half of the challenge. You've got, by some estimates, we've got this estimate is 33% of the energy used in the United States is for heating. And then another 11% for cooling. So that's almost half. And yet we don't have that same sophisticated planning, analysis, those tools, the capacity to really get smart about how we invest in heating and cooling infrastructure. So this is the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, world class. They do amazing analysis on how we can best invest in affordable electrical infrastructure in the Northwest. But their mandate from Congress is specifically just about electricity. So they can't really look at the whole system. So we need to sort of rethink some of the scope and mandate of our key institutions and start to take in more of a whole system approach. Talk about opportunity. Right now, according to Sightline Institute, and this may have gone down a little bit because gas prices have gone down, but basically we're spending in Oregon and Washington $30 billion a year, $30 billion a year on fossil fuels. And most of that, since we don't produce fossil fuels in Oregon and Washington, most of that leaves our economy when we fill up our tank or buy fossil energy. So that is a tremendous economic opportunity. If we can, over the next decade or two, build the infrastructure that allows us to use local resources, renewable resources, in place of all that fossil energy, we're going to have a lot more money cycling within our economy, our state's economies. So the report concludes with 3 audacious ideas to begin to turn that drain into a faucet. I was trying to come up with sort of an infrastructure appropriate analogy, but so all this money's draining out of our economy, let's turn it into a faucet of opportunity. I don't think that totally worked, but I tried. So 1, develop a world-class integrated fossil fuel or fossil-free energy system. That's basically the primary focus of the whole report and the whole set of conversations that we had around this report. 2nd, launch a sustained jobs campaign that also develops the next generation infrastructure workforce. So Where there are critical areas where the market and where utilities are not investing in critical components of the future energy system, let's have our states target those and figure out how to get sustained investment in smart infrastructure solutions to those areas. For instance, there's tremendous capacity to make our commercial buildings much, much more energy efficient. And figure out strategies where that investment will endure for 10 years or so, and then work with our union apprenticeship programs, work with technical colleges and our universities to train up and we're creating a market for those jobs. We're gaining sustained investment, and it's a great opportunity to build the next generation infrastructure workforce. Third, ramp up R&D. We already have some world-class research and development and deployment happening in the Northwest. The smart grid, the Pacific Northwest Smart Grid deployment project was the most successful, largest scale, multi-partner program of its kind in the country, probably the world, doing amazing work. Let's scale that up. Let's ramp that up and create a living laboratory for advanced energy in the Northwest. So all three of those ideas are very complementary and reinforcing of each other. Bottom line, we need infrastructure innovators. I hope that you can get a little bit excited about the future of infrastructure. As boring as the concept is, we need innovators. We need professionals. We need creative people. We need greeners to be moving into this field to help transform how we approach these systems and how we invest billions and billions of dollars in these systems. We have a great, big, huge, scary retirement wave coming. We need you to fill these jobs. And we're facing climate change. So there's a lot of urgency around this. So we need to reimagine our infrastructure systems to get innovative. We need to rethink how we invest in these systems. And we need to inspire and to mentor the next generation of planners and managers and operators and others in the infrastructure systems. So that's it. I want to introduce you to my colleague. The first hire in the history of the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure is Terry Carroll, graduate student in the Master's of Environmental Studies program. So here's how you can get a hold of him. Yeah.